Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Derek Holloway had built his life like an architect designs a fortress, methodical, precise, and seemingly impenetrable. At 38, he owned Holloway Construction, a mid-sized firm that had rebuilt half of Millbrook after the tornado 5 years ago. His calloused hands and weathered face told stories of a man who'd climbed from nothing, starting as a day laborer at 16 after his father abandoned the family. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent his adult life building structures that lasted, while his marriage to Lydia crumbled in ways he was only beginning to understand. Lydia Holloway had been the crown jewel of Millbrook's social elite when Derek met her 8 years ago. Daughter of Judge Randolph Sinclair, she'd attended private schools and graduated from Northwestern with a degree she'd never used. Her blonde hair always fell perfectly, her makeup never smudged, and her smile could disarm anyone. Except Derek had noticed it never quite reached her eyes anymore. They'd married after a whirlwind romance that, in hindsight, felt more like a business transaction. Derek provided the stability and success her family expected. Lydia provided the social connections and respectability Derek's blue-collar background lacked. Their 2 children, Emma, 16, and Lucas, 14, had become pawns in an increasingly cold household where conversations centered on schedules and obligations rather than dreams or feelings. Derek had noticed the changes gradually. Lydia's late nights volunteering for charity events. Her sudden interest in yoga classes that seemed to run past their scheduled times. The way she'd started dressing differently, more provocatively, claiming it was for her own confidence. Most telling was how she'd begun criticizing everything about Derek. His clothes, his friends, his provincial interests like fishing and watching football. But Derek wasn't the type to confront without evidence. He'd learned patience during his lean years, watching and waiting for the right moment to act. In business, timing was everything. In life, he suspected, it was even more crucial. 3 weeks before the Christmas party, Derek had hired a private investigator named Rita Kowalski, a former cop with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. What she'd uncovered was a 6-month affair with Trevor Ashford, the pretentious art gallery owner downtown. Trevor was everything Derek wasn't: smooth-talking, cultured, from old money that had never required actual work to maintain. The photographs Rita provided showed Lydia and Trevor at expensive restaurants, holding hands in his BMW, and entering the Grandview Hotel on Tuesday afternoons. But Derek wanted more than proof of infidelity. He wanted to understand the depth of Lydia's betrayal and Trevor's arrogance before he decided what to do about it. That understanding would come at the most unexpected moment, during what should have been a celebration of Derek's success. Chapter 2. The Christmas Revelation. The annual Holloway Construction Christmas Party was Derek's favorite event of the year. Unlike the stuffy charity galas Lydia dragged him to, this was a celebration with his crew, the men and women who'd helped him build something meaningful. They'd rented the ballroom at the Riverside Inn, and Derek had spared no expense on food, drinks, and bonuses for his 68 employees. Derek wore his best suit, a navy blue number Lydia had picked out, but which made him feel like he was playing dress-up. Lydia glided through the party in a red dress that cost more than most of his workers made in a week, playing the perfect wife with practiced ease. She charmed the foreman's wives, laughed at the superintendent's jokes, and generally performed the role she perfected over 8 years of marriage. Roland Grayson, Derek's lawyer, and the closest thing he had to a best friend, had been drinking heavily since the cocktail hour began. Roland handled most of Derek's contracts and had become wealthy enough to develop both an expensive Scotch habit and a loose tongue. At 55, Roland had been through 3 divorces and claimed to have learned from each one. Derek was returning from the bathroom, walking down the narrow hallway that connected the restrooms to the main ballroom, when he heard Roland's booming voice carry over the Christmas music. "Lydia, darling, I've always wondered something," Roland said, his words slightly slurred but his tone playful. "How do you put up with such a boring husband? I mean, Derek's a good man, but he's about as exciting as watching concrete dry. Derek stopped in his tracks, hidden by the alcove near the hallway entrance. Through the gap between two decorative pillars, he could see Roland gesturing with a scotch glass, while Lydia stood near the appetizer table, her perfect smile faltering for just a moment before reshaping itself into something sharper. "Oh, Roland," Lydia said, her voice carrying that musical quality she used when she was about to deliver a particularly cutting remark. "Trust me, I'm working on an exit strategy. Life's too short to waste on mediocre men." The words hit Derek like a physical blow, but not because they revealed her feelings. Rita's investigation had already confirmed Lydia's dissatisfaction. What devastated him was the casual cruelty of it, the way she delivered the line with such practiced ease, as if she'd been rehearsing it. This wasn't a moment of weakness or frustration. This was calculated contempt delivered in front of his friend, at his party, surrounded by his employees. Roland laughed, completely oblivious to the venom in Lydia's response. "Well, when you do execute that exit strategy, give me a call. I could use a fourth wife who actually knows how to entertain." Lydia's laugh was like breaking glass. "I'll keep that in mind, Roland, though I might be too busy with someone who actually understands what it means to live a little." Derek understood the subtext immediately. Trevor Ashford was everything Derek wasn't: spontaneous, worldly, unconcerned with practical matters like mortgages and college funds. Trevor could whisk Lydia away for weekend trips to Chicago or surprise her with expensive jewelry, because he never had to worry about building something from nothing. Derek remained in the shadows for another few minutes, watching Lydia work the room. She moved through his employees like a predator among prey, all smiles and small talk, while mentally cataloging everything she planned to leave behind. When she approached Mike Patterson, Derek's lead foreman, and complimented his wife's dress with the same false warmth she'd just used to discuss Derek's inadequacies, Derek felt something cold and final settle in his chest. He returned to the party as if nothing had changed, playing his role as the gracious host. He thanked his employees for their hard work, praised their dedication, and promised another successful year ahead. He danced with Lydia during the slow songs, accepting compliments on what a beautiful couple they made while knowing it was all performance. When Lydia excused herself to powder her nose, Derek noticed she took her phone with her. When she returned 20 minutes later with slightly smudged lipstick and a text message excuse about the babysitter needing to leave early, Derek knew she'd been coordinating with Trevor. They stayed until the last employee left, with Derek maintaining his facade while mentally cataloging every false smile, every casual touch, every moment of the elaborate deception Lydia had constructed around their marriage. Chapter 3: The Vanishing Act. The drive home was silent except for the sound of winter wind against the windows of Derek's pickup truck. Lydia stared out the passenger side window, presumably thinking about Trevor and whatever plans they'd been making via text. Derek focused on the road, but his mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating and planning. Their house sat on 5 acres outside Millbrook city limits, a custom-built colonial that Derek had designed and constructed as a wedding gift for Lydia. Every beam, every fixture, every detail had been chosen to create something worthy of the woman he'd thought he was marrying. Now it felt like a museum dedicated to his own naivety. The babysitter, Mrs. Chun from down the road, left quickly after they arrived. Emma and Lucas were already asleep, having spent the evening doing homework and watching Netflix. Derek stood in the doorway of each child's room, studying their faces in the dim light from the hallway. Emma looked more like Lydia every year. The same sharp cheekbones, the same blonde hair, the same unconscious arrogance, even in sleep. Lucas favored Derek's side of the family, with darker hair and the kind of solid build that suggested he'd grow into manual labor as easily as office work. Derek wondered how much they knew about their mother's afternoon activities, how much they'd figured out about the growing distance between their parents. Lydia was already in bed when Derek finished his rounds, wearing silk pajamas and pretending to read a magazine. She'd removed her makeup and pulled her hair back, transforming from the polished socialite back into the woman who shared his bed, but increasingly little else. "Good party tonight," she said without looking up from her magazine. Roland was in fine form. Derek undressed methodically, hanging his suit carefully in the closet they'd shared for 8 years. Roland drinks too much at these things. Sometimes he says things he shouldn't. Oh, you know how he is? He doesn't mean anything by it. Lydia's voice was perfectly casual, but Derek caught the slight tension around her eyes. She was wondering how much he'd heard, how much he knew. Derek climbed into bed, maintaining the careful distance that had developed between them over recent months. I'm thinking about taking some time off after the holidays. Maybe a long weekend, just to clear my head. That sounds nice, Lydia said, still focused on her magazine. Will you want company? Or is this one of your solo fishing trips? It was a test question, Derek realized. She was hoping for solo time, so she could spend an uninterrupted weekend with Trevor. Solo, Derek confirmed. I need some time to think about things. Lydia's relief was subtle but visible. Of course. You worked so hard. You deserve a break. Derek lay awake long after Lydia's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep. He wasn't planning a fishing trip. He was planning something far more comprehensive, something that would require careful preparation and flawless execution. Lydia wanted an exit strategy. Derek would give her one, but not the kind she was expecting. Over the next 3 days, Derek began laying groundwork. He transferred money from their joint accounts into business accounts Lydia couldn't access. He collected important documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, property deeds, and secured them in his office safe. He researched divorce lawyers, not to hire them, but to understand what Lydia's options would be when his plan reached its conclusion. Most importantly, Derek began documenting everything. Rita Kowalski's investigation had provided one kind of evidence, but Derek needed a broader picture. He installed software on Lydia's laptop that would track her emails and browsing history. He placed a GPS tracker on her car. He began recording phone conversations and photographing credit card statements. Derek wasn't planning a simple divorce. He was planning the complete and systematic destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. Lydia and Trevor had built their affair on the foundation of his trust and generosity. When Derek was finished, they would understand exactly what they had lost and exactly how much their betrayal would cost them. On the 4th day after the Christmas party, Derek received a call from Rita Kowalski with information that would accelerate his timeline considerably. Chapter 4. Gathering Intelligence. Rita Kowalski's call came at 6 in the morning while Derek was reviewing blueprints in his home office. The former detective's voice carried the kind of urgency that came from years of delivering bad news to people who thought they were prepared for it. Derek, we need to meet. Today. There's something about your wife and Trevor Ashford you need to know, and it's not something I want to discuss over the phone. They met at Rusty's Diner, a truck stop restaurant outside town, where Derek could be sure no one from Lydia's social circle would see them. Rita arrived carrying a manila folder thick enough to represent weeks of surveillance and investigation. Your wife and Trevor aren't just having an affair, Rita began without preamble. They're planning to disappear together. Within the next month. Derek's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Disappear how? Rita spread photographs across the scratched table surface. Trevor's been liquidating assets for 3 weeks. He sold his gallery building to a shell corporation he controls, officially for tax purposes. He's moved most of his art collection to a storage facility in Chicago. And yesterday, your wife opened a bank account in the Cayman Islands. The photographs showed Lydia entering First National Bank with documents Derek didn't recognize, Trevor loading paintings into a moving truck, and both of them at what appeared to be a travel agency. Rita had been thorough, capturing multiple angles and timestamps that told a story of methodical preparation. How much money are we talking about? Derek asked, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. Trevor's liquidation will net him close to $2 million. But that's not the worst part. Rita pulled out a document that made Derek's blood run cold. Your wife forged your signature on a home equity loan 3 weeks ago. She's borrowed $800,000 against the house. Derek studied the paperwork, recognizing Lydia's careful forgery of his signature. She practiced it well enough to fool the bank, but Derek could see the subtle differences in pressure and angle that revealed the deception. The house is in both our names. How did she manage this alone? She claimed you were out of town on business and provided a notarized power of attorney. Also forged, but convincing enough for a loan officer who was probably more interested in commission than verification. Derek felt the careful control he'd maintained since the Christmas party beginning to crack. This wasn't just infidelity or even abandonment. This was theft on a scale that would destroy everything he'd built. What's their timeline? Based on their activities, I'd say they're planning to leave right after New Year's. Trevor's already got plane tickets to Switzerland with a connection to somewhere that doesn't have extradition treaties with the United States. Your wife's been researching international divorce law, specifically how to dissolve marriages when one party is residing overseas. Derek leaned back in the cracked vinyl booth, processing the scope of Lydia's betrayal. She wasn't just leaving him for another man. She was stealing his children's future, his employees' security, everything he'd spent 20 years building. The woman he'd married, loved, and trusted had been planning the systematic destruction of his life while lying in his bed every night. "There's one more thing," Rita said, her voice gentler now. "Trevor's been telling people around town that your business is failing, that you're leveraged beyond recovery. He's been positioning himself as Lydia's rescuer, saving her from financial ruin." The calculated nature of the lie revealed Trevor's sophisticated understanding of social dynamics. By the time Derek discovered the theft, Lydia and Trevor would be gone, and Milberg's gossip network would already have accepted the narrative that Derek Holloway had failed as both a husband and businessman. Derek paid Rita's fee and added a substantial bonus. "I need you to keep monitoring them, but from a distance. I don't want them to know they've been discovered until I'm ready." "What are you planning, Derek?" Rita's cop instincts made her cautious about clients who seemed too calm in the face of devastating news. "I'm planning to give them exactly what they deserve," Derek replied. "But I need to be smart about it. They've been planning this for months. I need to plan better." Derek spent the rest of the day at his office, canceling meetings and rearranging his schedule. To his employees, he appeared to be handling routine year-end business. In reality, he was designing the most important project of his career, a trap sophisticated enough to catch two people who thought they were smarter than everyone around them. The first component was financial. Derek began systematically moving assets beyond Lydia's reach, using business partnerships and holding companies he'd established during his company's growth. By day's end, he'd secured the majority of his wealth, while leaving enough in accessible accounts to avoid triggering Lydia's suspicion. The second component was legal. Derek spent 2 hours with his attorney, not Roland Grayson, but a different lawyer in the next county who specialized in criminal fraud cases. The forged loan documents would be enough to prosecute Lydia for bank fraud, but Derek wanted more comprehensive charges when the time came. The third component was personal. Derek drove to his children's schools and quietly spoke with their guidance counselors, teachers, and coaches. He didn't reveal the situation, but he began laying groundwork for what would happen when their world collapsed around them. By the time Derek returned home that evening, he'd transformed from victim to architect. Lydia and Trevor had spent months planning Derek's destruction. Derek would spend the next 3 weeks planning theirs. Chapter 5: The Honey Trap. Derek's plan required Trevor and Lydia to accelerate their timeline, to make mistakes born of greed and overconfidence. The key was offering them an opportunity too tempting to refuse, something that would force them to expose themselves completely. The opportunity came in the form of the Riverside Development Project, a luxury condominium complex Derek had been considering for months. The project would require a significant investment from Holloway Construction, but the potential profits were enormous. More importantly, the project would require Derek to travel extensively over the next month, providing Trevor and Lydia with the perfect cover for their final preparations. Derek announced the project at dinner 3 days before New Year's Eve, carefully watching Lydia's reaction as he described the timeline and travel requirements. "It's a big risk," Derek said, pushing mashed potatoes around his plate while Emma texted friends and Lucas complained about his math homework. "I need to spend most of January in Portland, working with architects and city planners. But if it works out, it could set us up for life." Lydia's fork paused for just a moment before she resumed eating. "That sounds exciting, Derek, but also stressful. Are you sure you want to take on something so demanding right now?" It was perfectly performed concern, but Derek could see the calculations behind her eyes. A month of freedom to finalize arrangements with Trevor, to transfer money and prepare for their escape. I think it's exactly what I need, Derek replied. A chance to prove what Holloway Construction can really accomplish. Over the next 2 days, Derek made a show of preparing for the Portland trip. He booked flights, reserved a hotel room, and told his employees about the expanded timeline for his absence. Everything was designed to give Lydia and Trevor confidence in their plan while documenting their activities. Rita Kowalski's surveillance confirmed Derek's suspicions immediately. Within hours of Derek's announcement, Lydia called Trevor to discuss moving up their schedule. They met that same afternoon at the Grandview Hotel, not for their usual romantic encounter, but for what appeared to be a detailed planning session. The GPS tracker on Lydia's car revealed additional meetings with a real estate agent, a financial advisor, and someone Rita identified as a document forger operating out of a copy shop in the next county. Trevor's activities included purchasing additional luggage, visiting a jewelry store to liquidate several expensive pieces, and making a substantial cash deposit at a bank Derek didn't recognize. But Derek's masterstroke was still to come. On December 30th, he called Lydia from his office with news that would force their hand completely. The Portland deal fell through, Derek said, injecting just the right amount of disappointment into his voice. The investors got cold feet at the last minute. I'll be staying in town after all. Lydia's silence lasted 3 seconds too long. Oh, that's too bad, Derek. I know you were excited about the opportunity. Actually, I'm thinking about taking a different approach, Derek continued. Maybe it's time to sell the business. Take the money and invest in something more stable. I've been thinking about your father's suggestion that I consider a partnership with the Ashford Gallery. Art seems like a growth market. Derek could almost hear Lydia's heart racing through the phone. If Derek sold Holloway Construction and invested the proceeds with Trevor, it would provide them with millions more than they planned to steal. But it would also require them to remain in Millbrook to maintain their charade indefinitely. Have you talked to Trevor about this? Lydia asked, her voice carefully neutral. Not yet. I thought I'd discuss it with you first. What do you think about the idea? I think you should follow your instincts, Derek. You've always been so good at knowing what's right for our family. The irony of her response was so perfect Derek almost laughed. Instead, he pressed his advantage. I'm going to call Trevor tomorrow and set up a meeting. Maybe we could all have dinner together this weekend, discuss the possibilities. Lydia agreed with enthusiasm that sounded genuine, but Derek knew it was desperation. Trevor and Lydia were trapped between an opportunity too large to ignore and a timeline that no longer worked in their favor. They would have to make their move immediately before Derek could entangle them in business partnerships that would complicate their escape. Derek hung up the phone and called Rita Kowalski. They're going to run, he said, probably within the next 48 hours. I need you to be ready. Ready for what? Derek smiled for the first time since the Christmas party. Ready to watch everything they've planned fall apart in the most spectacular way possible. Chapter 6, The Net Closes. New Year's Eve arrived with the kind of bitter cold that made even hardened Midwesterners question their life choices. Derek spent the morning at his office, ostensibly preparing for the meeting with Trevor that would never happen. In reality, he was coordinating with Rita Kowalski and finalizing the details of a plan that had taken on a life of its own. The beauty of Derek's trap was its simplicity. Trevor and Lydia believed they controlled the timeline, that they could dictate when and how their betrayal would be revealed. Derek had allowed them to keep that illusion while systematically removing every avenue of escape they thought they possessed. Rita's morning surveillance report confirmed Derek's predictions. Lydia had withdrawn the maximum daily amount from 3 different ATMs, using accounts Derek didn't know existed. Trevor had been seen loading suitcases into a rented van, the same van that would supposedly transport his remaining art pieces to Chicago, but was actually packed with everything needed for a permanent disappearance. Most tellingly, both Trevor and Lydia had visited Dr. Patricia Wells, a travel medicine specialist who provided vaccinations and health certificates for international travel. The specific vaccines they'd requested indicated destinations in South America, not Europe as Trevor's plane ticket suggested. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. Working late at the community center tonight. Don't wait up. Happy New Year. The community center had been closed for renovations since October. It was a clumsy lie from someone who'd grown overconfident in Derek's supposed ignorance. Rita's tracking showed Lydia's car at the Grandview Hotel, where she and Trevor were presumably having their farewell celebration before implementing their escape plan. Derek drove home to find Emma getting ready for a New Year's party at her friend Madison's house, and Lucas camped in front of the television with enough snacks to survive a siege. Both children seemed oblivious to the tension that had characterized the house for weeks, or perhaps they'd grown so accustomed to their parents' distance that they no longer questioned it. "Dad, can you drive me to Madison's?" Emma asked, struggling with the clasp of a necklace Derek recognized as one of Lydia's more expensive pieces. "Mom said I could borrow this, but I can't get it fastened." Derek helped Emma with a necklace, noting that she'd also borrowed Lydia's favorite earrings and a bracelet that had been a 10th anniversary gift. Either Lydia was being unusually generous, or she was distributing jewelry she wouldn't be able to take when she disappeared. "Of course I'll drive you," Derek said. "What time should I pick you up?" Madison's mom said she'd bring me home tomorrow afternoon. "We're having a sleepover after the party." "Perfect." Derek had worried about how to keep the children safe during what he expected would be a chaotic night. Emma's sleepover solved half the problem. "Lucas, you want to spend the night at Grandpa's house? He's been asking when you'd visit again." Lucas looked up from his video game with interest. Derek's father lived 40 minutes away on a small farm where Lucas could shoot BB guns and drive the ancient tractor without supervision. "Can I take my PlayStation?" "Sure." Within 2 hours, Derek had both children safely away from whatever was about to unfold. He drove Emma to Madison's house, helped Lucas pack for his grandfather's farm, and returned to an empty house that felt like a stage waiting for the final act of a play. Derek poured himself a scotch and sat in his study, surrounded by the evidence of 20 years of building something meaningful. Family photographs showed happier times when Lydia's smiles had been genuine and their children were young enough to believe their parents were heroes. Business awards and certificates documented Derek's rise from day laborer to successful contractor. The contrast between what he'd built and what he was about to lose felt surreal. His phone rang at 10:47 p.m. Rita Kowalski's voice was tight with urgency. "Derek, they're moving." Lydia left the hotel an hour ago and went home. "She's packing." Trevor's at the airport filing a flight plan for a private plane. Not the commercial flight to Switzerland, a private jet to Mexico. Derek felt adrenaline surge through his system. Mexico. Gets better. The plane belongs to a shell company Trevor's been hiding. He's had this plan for months, maybe longer. The Switzerland tickets were misdirection in case someone was watching. "Where is Lydia now?" "Still at your house." "But Derek, there's something else." "She's not alone." Derek's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "Trevor's there with her. They're loading boxes into his van. I think they're taking more than just her personal belongings." Derek was already moving towards gun safe. He'd learned to shoot as a teenager, hunting with his grandfather during the years after his father left. The .45 caliber pistol felt comfortable in his hand, familiar and reassuring. He'd hoped it wouldn't come to this, but Trevor and Lydia had forced his hand by escalating beyond infidelity and theft in a home invasion. "Call the police," Derek told Rita. "Tell them there's a burglary in progress at my address. Tell them the homeowner is en route and may be armed." "Derek, be careful. Don't do anything that can't be undone." Derek hung up and drove toward the confrontation he'd been preparing for since the Christmas party. The time for patience and planning had ended. Trevor and Lydia had made their choices. Now Derek would make his. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. Derek parked his truck 2 blocks from his house and approached on foot, using the cover of winter darkness and overgrown hedges along the property line. The house he'd built with his own hands looked different now, lit from within by the same warm lights that had once represented sanctuary and family. Now they illuminated something much darker. Through the living room window, Derek could see Lydia directing Trevor as they packed boxes with items Derek recognized. His grandmother's silver service, family photographs in expensive frames, electronics, and documents from Derek's home office. This wasn't a lover's escape. It was a calculated robbery designed to strip Derek of everything that held personal or financial value. Trevor moved with the casual arrogance of someone who believed he'd already won. He handled Derek's possessions without care, dropping a framed photo of Derek's deceased mother onto the hardwood floor and leaving it there when the glass cracked. Lydia showed no reaction to the damage, focused entirely on filling a jewelry box with items from her collection, items Derek had purchased during better times when he'd still believed in their marriage. Derek circled to the back of the house, using his key to enter through the kitchen door he'd installed himself 8 years ago. The familiar sounds of his home, the humming refrigerator, the settling of wood beams in the winter cold, seemed alien now that strangers were ransacking everything he'd built. He could hear their voices from the living room, low but urgent. "Just leave the furniture," Trevor was saying. "We can buy new things when we get settled. The important thing is liquid assets and anything easily portable." "I want the painting from the bedroom," Lydia replied. "It's worth more than everything else combined." Derek knew the painting she meant, a small landscape by a regional artist he'd bought for their 5th anniversary. Lydia had claimed to love it, but Derek now realized she'd probably been calculating its resale value even then. Derek moved through his own house like a stranger, noting what they'd already taken and what they'd left behind. His construction awards meant nothing to them. The children's school photos had been ignored. Even their wedding album lay discarded on the floor, its leather binding torn where someone had removed photos that might have value. The sight of his discarded wedding album was what finally broke Derek's careful control. Not the theft, not even the betrayal, but the casual destruction of memories that had once meant everything to him. These people had invaded his sanctuary and defiled it, treating his life like a garage sale to be picked over and discarded. Derek stepped into the living room doorway, his presence unnoticed for several seconds while Trevor struggled to lift a box of Derek's tools, and Lydia sorted through documents she'd taken from his office safe. When Lydia finally looked up and saw Derek standing there, her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, and finally a cold calculation that revealed exactly who she'd become. "Derek," she said, her voice steady despite being caught in the act of robbing him. "You're home early." Trevor spun around, dropping the box of tools with a crash that sent wrenches and screwdrivers scattering across the floor Derek had installed with his own hands. Trevor's face showed pure panic, the expression of a man who'd been planning this moment for months, but had never truly believed he'd have to face Derek directly. "I guess I should have texted first," Derek replied, his voice conversational despite the rage building in his chest. "Though it looks like you're both a little busy to check messages." The three of them stood in Derek's living room like actors who'd forgotten their lines. Outside, Derek could hear the distant sound of sirens, still several minutes away, but getting closer. Rita had made the call as instructed, providing Derek with a deadline for this confrontation. "Derek, this isn't what it looks like," Lydia began, falling back on a lie so transparently false it bordered on insulting. "Really?" Derek gestured to the boxes, the scattered belongings, the obvious signs of theft. "Because it looks like my wife and her lover are robbing me blind while I'm supposed to be out of town." Trevor found his voice, though it came out higher than his usual smooth tenor. "Look, Derek, we can explain everything. This is just a misunderstanding." Derek smiled, and both Lydia and Trevor took an involuntary step backward. They'd never seen Derek truly angry, had never understood that his calm demeanor masked something much more dangerous when properly provoked. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Derek said. "I understand that you've been planning this for months. I understand that you forged my signature to steal $800,000 from our home equity line. I understand that you've been liquidating assets and preparing to disappear to a country without extradition treaties." Lydia's face went pale. "How did you know about all of it?" Derek completed her question. "Because I'm not the stupid, boring husband you described me as at my own Christmas party. Because I've been watching you both for weeks, documenting every move you've made, every lie you've told, every dollar you've stolen." The sirens were getting closer now, and Trevor was edging toward the front door with the desperate look of someone calculating whether he could run fast enough to avoid what was coming. "I wouldn't," Derek advised, noting Trevor's positioning. The police are already en route, and they'll be very interested in those boxes you've packed with stolen property. Derek reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through the photographic evidence Rita had compiled. Bank fraud, theft, conspiracy, burglary. That's quite a list you've managed to accumulate. And Trevor, those aren't even the most serious charges you'll be facing. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Unfolds. The police arrived in a cascade of red and blue lights that painted Derek's house in alternating colors of authority and justice. Detective Sharon Morrison, a woman Derek knew from various city council meetings, led the response team with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested she'd dealt with domestic situations before. Mr. Holloway, Detective Morrison said, noting Derek's calm demeanor and the obvious signs of theft throughout the living room. Rita Kowalski called in a burglary in progress. Can you tell me what's happening here? Derek gestured at the boxes, the scattered belongings, and the two people who were trying to look like anything other than thieves caught in the act. I came home to find my wife and her boyfriend stealing my property. They've been planning to disappear with assets stolen from our joint accounts. Detective Morrison's trained, I took in the scene quickly. The packed boxes, the scattered personal items, the guilty expressions on Lydia and Trevor's faces. Ma'am, sir, I need to see some identification. Lydia produced her driver's license with shaking hands. Trevor fumbled for his wallet. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Detective Morrison examined their IDs while two uniformed officers began documenting the scene and inventorying the packed boxes. Mrs. Holloway, Detective Morrison said, "This is your residence?" "Yes, but..." "And Mr. Ashford, what's your relationship to this household?" Trevor's mouth opened and closed without sound for several seconds. Finally, he managed, "I'm a friend of the family. A friend who's helping pack boxes at 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve." Detective Morrison's skepticism was evident. "Mr. Holloway, do you want to press charges for burglary?" "Absolutely," Derek replied. "But that's not the only crime that's been committed here." Derek handed Detective Morrison the folder of evidence Rita had compiled. Photographs of Trevor and Lydia's affair, documentation of the forged loan documents, bank records showing the systematic theft of marital assets, and a timeline that revealed months of premeditation. Detective Morrison reviewed the documents with growing interest. "Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Holloway, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the Miranda rights continued, Derek watched his wife and her lover realize that their carefully constructed plan had collapsed completely. Lydia's perfect composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face as the handcuffs clicked into place. Trevor maintained his silence, but his face had gone ashen as he calculated the legal consequences of his choices. "Derek, please," Lydia said as Officer Martinez guided her toward the patrol car. "Think about the children. Think about our family." Derek's response came from a place of cold fury that had been building since the Christmas party. "I did think about our family, Lydia. I thought about it every day for 8 years while you were planning to destroy it. The house felt impossibly quiet after the police cars departed with their prisoners." Derek stood in his living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his marriage and the evidence of betrayal, so complete it had transformed his sanctuary into a crime scene. But Derek's plan was far from complete. The arrests were just the beginning of a reckoning that would extend far beyond criminal charges. Over the next several days, Derek began implementing the broader consequences he'd designed for everyone who had participated in his betrayal. The forged loan documents provided grounds for the bank to freeze all accounts associated with Lydia's theft, trapping money she'd planned to access during her escape. Trevor's art gallery, already compromised by his asset liquidation, faced additional scrutiny when Derek provided evidence of tax evasion and insurance fraud to the appropriate authorities. Derek called Emma and Lucas to explain what had happened, delivering the news with clinical precision that matched the way Lydia had planned to abandon them. Both children were devastated, but Derek noted that neither seemed surprised by their mother's capacity for deception. "Dad," Emma said during their phone conversation, "I knew something was wrong. Mom kept asking weird questions about our schedules and whether we'd ever want to travel. She was probably trying to figure out how to take you with her," Derek explained. But her plan didn't include staying in one place long enough for you to have stable lives. The revelation that their mother had been willing to uproot them for an affair with a man they barely knew completed the children's understanding of Lydia's selfishness. Neither child asked when she would be coming home. Chapter 9. The Final Resolution. 3 months after New Year's Eve, Derek sat in his lawyer's office reviewing the final paperwork that would close the most painful chapter of his life. Lydia had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for bank fraud, with additional state charges pending. Trevor faced similar federal charges plus tax evasion and conspiracy, ensuring that his own prison sentence would be significantly longer. The divorce proceedings had been straightforward given the circumstances. Lydia's criminal conviction voided any claim to Derek's business or assets, while her abandonment of Emma and Lucas eliminated her parental rights. Derek had gained full custody along with a judgment that would claim any future earnings Lydia might achieve after her release. Emma and Lucas had adapted to their new reality with the resilience of teenagers who'd already learned not to trust their mother's promises. Emma threw herself into planning for college, determined to create a future that didn't depend on anyone else's reliability. Lucas discovered a talent for construction work, spending afternoons at Derek's job sites and learning skills that connected him to his father's legacy. The house sale closed yesterday, Derek's lawyer informed him. The buyers are a young family from Chicago who appreciate the craftsmanship. They're planning to keep most of your custom work. Derek nodded, unsurprised that strangers would value his house more than his wife had. The sale proceeds, combined with insurance settlements and recovered stolen assets, had restored Derek's financial position while providing a substantial college fund for both children. Derek had purchased a smaller house closer to town, a fixer-upper that would give him and his children a project to work on together. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. They were building something new from the foundation up, using skills and materials that would last. The phone on the lawyer's desk buzzed with an incoming call. Derek's lawyer glanced at the caller ID and frowned. It's the state attorney's office. Do you want to take this? Derek nodded, curious about what new development might affect his case. The conversation was brief, but revealing. That was interesting, the lawyer said after hanging up. Lydia's been trying to contact you from prison. She's claiming she has information about Trevor's finances that might help with asset recovery. Derek considered this for exactly 3 seconds. Tell them I'm not interested. Derek, there might be money involved. Significant money if Trevor was hiding assets we didn't discover. I don't care. Derek's voice carried the finality of someone who'd already won everything that mattered to him. Lydia made her choices. She can live with the consequences. Derek gathered his papers and prepared to leave, but his lawyer had one more surprise. There's something else. Trevor's parents want to meet with you. They're offering to pay restitution beyond what the court ordered, apparently trying to minimize their family scandal. Derek smiled, remembering Trevor's arrogance and sense of entitlement. How much are they offering? $2 million, plus a public apology. It was more money than Derek had lost, enough to secure his children's futures and expand his business beyond anything he'd previously imagined. The offer represented everything Trevor's family valued: the ability to buy their way out of consequences, to treat criminal behavior as a social embarrassment rather than a moral failure. Tell them no, Derek said. Tell them their son made his choices, and now he gets to experience what it means to lose everything you thought you could count on. Derek drove home to find Emma and Lucas working on homework at the kitchen table of their temporary apartment. They'd grown closer since Lydia's arrest, supporting each other through the social awkwardness of having a criminal mother while maintaining their grades and activities. Dad, Madison's mom asked if we want to come to dinner this weekend, Emma said without looking up from her calculus homework. She said it's been too long since we had a proper family meal. Derek smiled at the irony. His broken family had found more genuine support from neighbors and friends than they'd ever received from Lydia's sophisticated social circle. That sounds nice. Did you want to go? Only if you're okay with Mrs. Patterson asking a million questions about whether you're dating anyone yet. Lucas warned from behind his history textbook. Derek laughed, realizing it was the first time genuine humor had filled their home in months. I think I can handle Mrs. Patterson's curiosity. As Derek helped his children with their homework, he reflected on the choices that had brought them to this point. Lydia and Trevor had seen him as boring, mediocre, someone whose stability could be taken for granted while they pursued excitement elsewhere. They'd mistaken his patience for weakness, his loyalty for stupidity. Derek had proven them wrong in the most comprehensive way possible. He protected his children, preserved his business, and ensured that everyone who betrayed him faced consequences that matched their crimes. Most importantly, he demonstrated to Emma and Lucas that actions have consequences, that integrity matters, and that building something meaningful requires more than charm and good intentions. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message from Rita Kowalski. Saw the news about Trevor's sentencing. 8 years federal, plus state charges pending. Thought you want to know. Derek deleted the message without responding. Trevor's fate no longer interested him, just as Lydia's attempts at reconciliation from prison fell on deaf ears. Derek had moved beyond revenge into something more powerful, indifference to the people who'd tried to destroy him. 3 months later, Derek broke ground on the largest project in Holloway Construction's history, a mixed-use development that would revitalize Millbrook's downtown core. Emma and Lucas helped with the groundbreaking ceremony, operating machinery under Derek's supervision, while local media documented the family business expanding into its next generation. Standing in the dirt that would become the foundation of something permanent and valuable, Derek realized he'd achieved something Lydia and Trevor would never understand. He'd built something that would outlast betrayal, something that would provide for his children and their children, something that couldn't be stolen or forged or abandoned. Derek Holloway had learned that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was building something so substantial that the people who betrayed him would spend the rest of their lives wondering what they could have had if they'd made different choices. As Derek watched his children plan the future they would build together, he knew that his exit strategy had been far more successful than anything Lydia had ever imagined. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.